This is Stories of Impact, the art and science of human flourishing. In every episode, we travel the world to explore intersections of science and spirituality. I'm your host, writer Tavia Gilbert, and along with journalist Richard Sergey, every first and third Tuesday, we look through a new lens at old traditions, hear from new generations as they dream up innovative solutions, and learn new ways to make sense of modern life. We're living in a hyper-technological, increasingly gamified world, my friends. And I don't know about you, but I often get caught up in a decidedly negative view of the impact of all that machinery, especially the impact on young people. But today I'm excited to bring you a more hopeful and constructive perspective. A story about gamified tech that's positively transformative.
The first time I used virtual reality, I realized that even though I was aware of my immediate environment, this device transported me to another experience, another place. So I started thinking, is it possible that this can put me in the situation of another person in the same way that I had this VR experience? Can I have an embodied experience of another person, someone from another ethnic group? So that's how the thought started, hence the proposal to try to use virtual reality to increase perspective taking and hence empathy and compassion towards someone from another ethnic group.
Dr. Eugene Ohu is an associate professor at Nigeria's Lagos Business School, a research scholar at Gannon University in Pennsylvania, and director and principal investigator at the Virtual Human-Computer Interaction Lab, whose native Nigeria is a West African country of more than 230 million people, with a complicated past that includes extreme tribalism, divided geography, cultural, social, and religious diversity, geopolitical conflict over oil wealth, and a horrific civil war and genocide that killed millions of people, including countless children by starvation.
I come from a country of 250 ethnic groups, 500 languages. There are 3 to 4 major ethnic groups, but there is a lot of division and stereotypical behavior between the ethnic groups and discriminations. So for a long time, I had been pondering, is it possible to have a united Nigeria?
Dr. Ohu wanted to do something radical to help his country unite. He wanted to ensure that the next generation of Nigerian leaders would be compassionate, tolerant, and empathetic toward all citizens, no matter their ethnic identity. He especially wanted Nigerian school children to embrace love and unity. He believed that empathy and compassion were the keys to the future of Nigeria, to healing the divides between Hausas, Yoruba, Igbo, and more than 200 other ethnic identity groups. He at least wanted to combat indifference, for example, to the 2014 kidnapping of nearly 300 schoolgirls by militant group Boko Haram.
When something happens to someone from another ethnic group and we hear it in the news, it sounds like it's happening to someone else. I remember years ago when some girls were kidnapped, the Chibok girls that made news, because it was around that time that I conceptualized this. The Chibok girls were Hausa girls. Hausas were supposed to be our brothers and sisters. But for many in other parts of the country, it was like, okay, it's happening over there. The Igbos, who were at the forefront of the victims of the civil war between 1967 and 1970, was another ethnic group that even though the civil war ended in 1970, they keep being marginalized wherever they go.
So what was his answer? This researcher, whose focus is at the intersection of technology, communication, and psychology, pursued the spark of inspiration in virtual reality games.
I think we are able to remain indifferent to the plight of other ethnic groups because we don't know what it feels like to be that person. So if I can have the person explain themselves to me, perhaps I might realize what it feels like to be that person.
He wondered,
How can that person explain themselves to me? They can tell their story, in which case they'll be limited to their power of expression. my ability to imagine what they are describing. They can give me a narrative to read. If I read it, it's limited to how well I'm able to visualize it. So I was thinking, therefore, if you have a device that can overcome these limitations, either explanatory power or my ability to imagine something, and then help me to create an image, what image can be more powerful than make me really feel that it is happening to me? Maybe that can lead to increased empathy, especially if I can get you to suffer discrimination as the other ethnic group.
Why virtual reality? Dr. Ohu says the technology uniquely offers not only a 360-degree view and spatial audio, but the realism of skin tones, clothing, environment. Virtual reality is immersive.
I am inside it. I am an actor in the experience. So the senses are deceived. Deception is what is happening. You then have what is called a sense of presence. A combination of all these, you feel that you are really there.
Dr. Ohu designed a study to teach children, ages 13 to 18, empathy and compassion through virtual reality. If he thought of his project as a game, it was designed to have a serious impact. Gamified in order to attract kids to engage in it. Dr. Ohu and his team created 4 language versions of the virtual reality experience, including versions designed for Igbos, Hausas, Yorubas, and a Niger Delta version representing the other minority groups. To join a VR room, players cannot enter into an experience of their own ethnic group. So a Hausa must enter the VR experience of a Yoruba, an Igbo, or someone from the Niger Delta. For each language version, the researchers also offered either an observed version, which for the player offers a third-person perspective, or an embodied version, where players become the character. And there's a role model version as well, which includes, in a third-person perspective, a teacher who joins the scene. As soon as Dr. Ohu's VR empathy game was ready for testing by Nigerian students, he next had to choose the school settings in which the virtual reality testing would be introduced.
We wanted to choose the schools we thought were more representative of the general population. So we decided to go only for public schools that were mixed schools. The schools should not be owned by a religious body. That was important to us, so that if there is any increase in empathy and compassion, we want to see how much of it was due to the intervention more than any moral education received in class.
In public schools across Lagos, hundreds of teens put on VR headsets, ready to observe or engage in embodied play. What did they experience?
So you are a 13-year-old girl with her father in a village, enjoying the evening sun. The sun is going down, and then it's time to go home. You begin to head home, but you have to walk through a marketplace. In walking through a marketplace, you see your neighbors, people you know from different ethnic groups. You are from a different ethnic group yourself. And then suddenly, people notice you, people who were your friends. First of all, the girl sees a friend of hers from school, calls out to her. For some reason, her friend ignores her. Then little by little, they notice a growing animosity as they were walking home that started with verbal insult, primarily because of their ethnic identity, that ends up in violence, and then the father of the girl dies at the end of the story. 8 weeks later, she's taken to another village to live with her uncle. First, she had witnessed ethnic discrimination where the father was a victim. She's in a school, a new school. She's expecting to make friends. There are 2 versions of the story. In one version, in the observed version, you are watching the girl as a third person, watching this happening. In the embodied version, it is happening to you. What's the difference? In the embodied version, you are in front of a mirror because it's a traditional day. You're supposed to dress in your ethnic attire. In the schools in Nigeria, students wear their school uniform. There's a common uniform. But on a traditional day, you dress in your ethnic attire, different colors, such that by looking at you, they know the ethnic group from which you come. And there she is in front of the mirror, preparing herself, and then there's an announcement over the PA system telling them to go to their classes dressed in their ethnic attire. Very proud. And in the embodied experience, you see yourself, you raise your hand, whatever motion you perform is duplicated by the character in the mirror. We did that deliberately to increase the sense of body ownership. And there you are, suddenly the door opens, and then three other students come in, all dressed in their different ethnic attires. You can see from looking at them that from different ethnic groups. They were talking about different ethnic groups like yours. You could hear them from the bathroom. Of course, you were hoping that they were not going to get into the bathroom because we're talking about your ethnic group. And then you become the target of the abuse and begin to mention different things about your ethnic group that make them not like your ethnic group. There's verbal abuse to the point of pouring water on that beautiful attire. And then the girl ends up on the floor crying. At each point, for each motion, each thing they do, especially for the embodied version, there are points to be got by the student for responding or for initiating the next action.
Dr. Ohu adds that there's additional value in the role model version. Adding a teacher to the scene came from revealing conversations the researchers had with educators and students in developing the storylines.
Before coming up with the story, we interviewed lots of adults and lots of 13 to 18-year-olds to understand what discrimination meant for them and instances of discrimination. For example, we were conscious of not causing distress, but at the end, we realized that what these kids had experienced were worse than we had imagined. The verbal abuse were built based on their experiences. So we didn't make up any one of these. So the adults also played a role there because we talked with adults also, and you saw that there was an intergenerational transfer both of aggression but also of suffering based on their ethnic identity. The role model version is similar to the observed version. The only difference is that, together with the girls, after the discrimination and abuse happens, a teacher appears on the scene. Previously, for the embody and observe version, we rely on the physical affordances of VR as a technology to do the teaching, hoping that simply being there and it happening to you can do something to you. But we also wanted to check how that compares with when the lessons, the teaching is coming from a role model. So we have a role model in the scene who now begins to give criteria about why some things were good, some things were not good, and so on.
Dr. Ohu got a baseline measurement of each player's empathy and compassion before they experienced the game. He then measured their empathy and compassion immediately after the experiences, whether the players were in the observed, embodied, or role model versions. Players were measured again 2, 4, and 6 months after the experience, in order for the researchers to gauge the persistence of the effects. What did Dr. Ohu find out about the impact on kids who experience living in another ethnic identity?
VR is effective in increasing empathy and compassion. Consistently, the embody and observe experience were effective in increasing empathy and compassion compared to the control. Significant increases in empathy and compassion 6 months after the intervention, especially in the embody and observe group compared to the control that did not receive the intervention. The assumption would then be that it would be the intervention primarily that will be contributing. Remember that all the participants come from the same environment. The only thing that differs among them was that some received this intervention, some did not. And if you only notice increases in this, because we're measuring all of them before the intervention, immediately after, 2 months after, 4 months after, 6 months after, and it was only in the intervention groups you notice consistent increase or at least a sustenance compared to the control that did not receive it, you can only conclude that there was something in the intervention contributing to this.
But it's not just the game itself that offers the full picture of the research study. There's another key component to the student experience, a transformative letter writing exercise. To complete the final powerful step in Dr. Ohu's research, students
write two types of letters. One, to write a letter to the victim of the discrimination in the experience, and then to write a letter to the principal or the head of the school. It was very interesting that you could see many writing in the first person. I was there. I saw what happened to you. You even have a letter where someone says, "Dear Amina," purportedly trying to address the character in the game. But because the person was in the embodied experience, that was all the reference to Amina. But subsequently, everything was, it happened to me, they did this to me, they did this to my father, I feel this way, I feel that way. So it seems to work. It seems to work.
What kinds of things have the kids written? What did they say?
Some kids were telling the character in the game not to let themselves be defined by what has happened. When you are told, for example, that the Igbos love money a lot and that they are very greedy, or you are told that Hausas, all they know are their cattle, and yet you're talking to a 13-year-old who is in school hoping to go beyond the stereotypical image of their ethnic identity, there is a risk that the ethnic abuse would reinforce the stereotypes, and so they can't aspire to be more. So when you now have a 13-year-old telling a fellow 13-year-old, don't let yourself be defined by what they said. You are more than this, you can do that, you can do that. I thought that was interesting coming from a 13-year-old. Remember, the people we're dealing with here, the ones writing these letters, are the same age as the victims. We also found some that were really upset with the school administration because there were two letters. The second letter was supposed to be to the principal. How is it possible that there was no adult in that environment, some would say? How is it possible that this would go on? This is definitely not the first time this is happening.
Dr. Ohu was surprised by how emotionally powerful the VR experience continued to be for the kids who'd participated, even months later.
You have students, when we go to them at time 3, 2 months later, to examine whatever changes have happened to them since then. And they give you examples of when they had to intervene to save someone from trouble, because I have learned what it means to be that person. Many of the kids were in tears because of what was happening, because they saw their age mates, the avatars, the characters were also adolescents like them. Realistic skin tone, the voice, because the accents were in accordance with the ethnic group being represented, so they could identify both the age, the gender, the tribe from the accent, and also from the characters that they are seeing. They could imagine this was happening to somebody. And some of them said it, I think it was happening to me. Then you ask them, would you like to have this experience again? They say yes. Why? To torment yourself for that? No. I want to see what is happening. I want to see it again. I think it was a wholesome experience for us. I think for the kids as well.
What were some of the big lessons learned?
If you just take the time to know a little more about the other person, you would not be indifferent. Just by having a VR experience, you were immersed and you had to be that other person. It's something that we don't do every day. Indifference, I think many times is not deliberate. Indifference is simply because another life is going on, my other life. So if you take the time to listen to the other person, imagine the other person's experience, and if you have a technology tool that can force that imagination, not leave you to your own imagination, but create that image for you in a forceful way, if you like, you will not be indifferent for long, I think.
The student players were not the only ones whose consciousness expanded because of the VR study. It changed Dr. Ohu's perspective, too.
I thought I knew Nigeria, but having to work on this game, having to talk to people from different ethnic groups, I would like to think it made me more empathetic, because I listened to the other stories. In order to build this, I listened to the other stories. I could imagine what it meant to be them. One thing I found was that we have more in common than differences. Because even when each ethnic group is expressing themselves in a different way, there's a commonality there because I'm expressing myself too in a different way. But what is common is, for example, if that person is telling me the story of her name and I tell you the story of my name, one thing we have in common is that each of us has a name that has a meaning for us. So I thought we had more things in common than differences. And even those differences really bring us together.
Dr. Ohu's dream is for this program to scale, to be added to the curriculum across all secondary schools.
On the one hand, it's going to be slow, but one dream we had in designing the embodied version versus the observed version, we also wanted the observed version to work. That third person perspective where you are watching it, you are not doing anything. You don't have as much agency as a first person perspective. Scalability was one reason we wanted it to work. This is one hope we have for scalability. So since the observed version works, then that's an argument for expanding this to many more schools. So rather than hope that the schools can afford a $250 headset with just a $10 cardboard and a phone, this VR experience can go to many more schools. And another hope we have is that what has happened here is increase in empathy and compassion where the target is ethnic discrimination. There are different types of discrimination based on different identities, could be ethnicity, could be religion, and so on. The same principles will apply. So we're expanding this, for example, to mental health. The topic of mental health is something that there's a lot of taboo around, at least in Nigeria, to increase more conversations around this. What does it feel like to be someone with depression, to have depression in the first person, things like this.
Can a tool like Dr. Ohu's help bridge tribal and political divides? He believes it's possible.
I would like to put more government people into this experience because I have had some adults take this experience and they all come out quiet and you hear a silent wow. I say government people because in Nigeria, there is a lot of centralization of power, which is also tied to the fact that a lot of resources, a lot of the GDP is around oil. So the one who controls the oil is very powerful. And so there's an inordinate struggle to get to the center. And then when you get there, you only favor your ethnic group and ignore all the others. So hence I say I would like to put the people in government in this experience so that you stop for a minute and realize that there are other people and think what it would be like to be like them, discriminated against on the basis of their ethnic identity. I think there will be more equity. So I'm optimistic, but the challenge is getting people to stop, getting them to stop and then see the other side. And I hope that an experience like this will help them see the other side.
Dr. Ohu's intervention won't just help Nigeria's youth become Nigeria's wise and peaceful leaders of the future. It will help each of them have a more flourishing future, no matter what.
Human flourishing for me understood as what? Fulfillment as a human being, being happy, living at peace with other people, well-being, physical and mental. I would like to think that a more empathetic person, not indifferent to the plight of the other person, will experience a greater flourishing themselves and will help the other person experience it.
We hope you'll come back in 2 weeks for another new episode. In the meantime, please share the Stories of Impact podcast with someone you think would love it. And we'd love to hear from you. You can get in touch anytime at storiesofimpact.org. This has been the Stories of Impact podcast with an interview by Richard Sergey, written and produced by Tavia Gilbert for Talkbox Productions. Music by Alexander Filipiak. Mix and master by Kayla Elrod. Executive producer Michelle Cobb. The Stories of Impact podcast is generously supported by Templeton World Charity Foundation.